Hello, everybody. It's me, Ryan Burns, the DB Cooper Sleuth, and I am coming to you. It is October 2nd, 2024, and I am without my partner in crime, Chris Cunningham. He is having some technical difficulties, so I will entertain you while we wait. Dan Grider bots have entered the chat. I don't think so. Well, maybe they have. So anyway, okay, so let's talk. Hello, everybody. I see my favorite couple. The legs are the legs. Brad and Nicole are there. Hey, Jay Weiss. Hello, Nikki. Hello, Ruth. Hello, Mary Johns from New Zealand, our Kiwi. Hello, Ollie. Hello, Oracle. Hello to my friend Agatha. She is in England. Hello to her. Here, I've got Chris now. So let's see. Hello, Chris.
Hey,
speak.
Can you hear me?
Perfect. Right, we're good.
Sorry about that. For some reason, it wasn't accepting the link, so I had to do it from the app. So I had to download the app to get into the studio. So, anyways, here I am. Long story short.
Okay. Yeah. Somebody just wrote that Chris has bailed out with an MB8, so he's bailed from the group.
You will never catch me jumping from an airplane.
No, I don't think so either. Yeah, I might know about parachutes. It is funny how the things that you learn about in this case. Hey, Winston, the things that you learn about in this case are things you never thought you would learn. You know, like I never thought I would learn about Sage radar or,
Oh, no. I mean, and the funny thing is, I was talking to a pilot person today, as a matter of fact, and, it's no secret that the part of the case that fascinates me the most is the airplane aspect, right? The flying, the piloting, the navigation, the avionics, the aeronautics, all of that. And I hate to fly. Takes me 3 Xanax on a plane to get me through the flight. So I don't like flying, but here I am, fascinated by airplanes. And
I remember you, because I remember you saying, I know that about you. And I remember you were saying, hey, wouldn't it be neat if we could like rent like a Cessna or something and fly it like 10,000 feet over the DZ? I'm like, bro.
I would still do it.
I'm like, okay, a commercial jet freaks you out. A Cessna you would need 15 Xanaxes.
Well, hey, whatever it takes.
Yeah, whatever it takes. Yes, I don't even know. I'm not even sure what we're supposed to talk about. We're just hanging out talking about Cooper.
Well, I know when you originally asked me, you'd said, kind of follow up on your terrific video on whether or not Cooper jumped and the pressure bump and the oscillations and all of that. And I watched that. I thought it was terrific. I shared it with pilot friends of mine, people in the industry, and they all terrific. So, that should be a go-to, just to copy and paste and send for anybody who thinks that Cooper did not jump from the aircraft that night. That should end any debate about whether or not Cooper exited the aircraft from 10,000 feet. So, great job with that. But yeah, I mean, I'm down to talk about anything, bud. We can talk about CooperCon coming up, DB November.
I guess about the video, the whole point of that video was I just wanted to. You see the same questions brought up a lot in the Cooper world. And even like people who know the case aren't really sure about the pressure bump, really. It's kind of it's a deeper concept.
Very technical. It's very technical. There are a lot of moving parts to it. You're exactly right. There's a lot of misunderstanding and misconceptions and, about that particular aspect. And, not surprisingly, it requires someone, and I'm not even sure I'm capable of it because I lack the expertise and the technical knowledge to really have a full understanding of it. There's knowledge, there's expertise, and then there's experience. And, I have knowledge. I'm not sure I have expertise, but, and I certainly don't have experience because I've never flown, never piloted or have any, flying experience. So, I do the best we can, and obviously we're looking at this in retrospect from, 52 years, backwards. So, not only do we have to look at something that do I have to look at something that I don't fully understand, which is aviation and communication, airplane communication, but then I have to do it 50 years in the past. So it's not like understanding stuff today. It's like, no, you have to understand the stuff that no longer exists. And the number of people who actually understand it, can explain it to you, is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So, that's really been the very difficult thing is not just learning about it, but finding people who can explain it to me like I'm a golden retriever,
Well, and especially I remember some of the difficulty we had with the Sage radar back then, trying to find people who knew exactly how that operated back then.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
We were able to find some people who knew enough about it, but you're right. It is kind of a dying. So it's, the knowledge, the firsthand knowledge of it is dying off. It's sad. Somebody asked, Ollie says, so that staircase was flapping around all the way to Reno. Yes.
Yeah. In fact, when they landed in Reno, because they slowed and there wasn't as much of the airstream drafting on that air stairs, they basically fully deployed and hit the ground. When they landed, that air stair hit the ground and threw off sparks and damaged the fiberglass paneling along the sides. So
right.
Yes. And it was cold. Because that air stair, the bulkhead door was open, the aft bulkhead door, and those stairs were open, and they were flying at 10,000 feet in November. It was cold. I think at one point they reported that the interior temperature was about 60 degrees, which is not something that, they're particularly equipped for. I don't think they had jackets. Maybe they did. I'm not sure what they were wearing in the cockpit, but yeah, it was cold and it was loud as hell, because the 727 is a 3-engine aircraft, and those 3 engines are located in the aft of the plane, obviously. And there's a lot of noise coming through that open door. So it was cold and it was loud, and they had to travel like that all the way from Seattle to Reno.
Yeah. And I think about how loud it must have been for Cooper himself. If you look at the pictures of where Cooper, of where the engines are compared to the stairs, it's ridiculous.
I've stood on those stairs. I've stood on a 727-100 stairs that were fully deployed. It was on the ground, obviously, and I was flabbergasted at how close those engines are to those stairs. It had to be deafening. And I forget exactly what Max says in regards to that, but I think he said that it was pretty damn loud.
Yeah, I think he just said it's pretty damn loud.
Yeah, and they're right there. And speaking of DB CooperCon in November, for those who don't know, we did get permission from the Museum of Flight for one day at CooperCon, where they will have that 727 that they have on their grounds open for everyone to tour. So anyone who gets a ticket to CooperCon can come aboard a 727 and look around and get a feel for it yourself, and have that experience of actually being on the plane. I don't believe that they'll have the air stairs deployed for us, but
probably
just
not.
Around and walking and seeing where Cooper sat and the cockpit and how small that airplane is. It's I walked around in one. Most of the chairs, the seats were removed, but even then it was a very cramped aircraft. And as you've pointed out, Bill Mitchell sat from shoulder to shoulder or elbow to elbow, 5 feet.
5 feet on the nose. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not a big aircraft, and I think hopefully at DB CooperCon, when people get a chance to walk through and tour it, they'll kind of get a sense spatially of what was going on that aircraft and where people were.
Well, and I've got a video here. I sent this to you earlier this week. Is that we talk about a lot about how, and this is where it gets technical for people, is that at 811-ish, they don't feel it. They see what are called oscillations in the cabin rate of climb indicator. And why don't you explain what this panel is? I mean, you've got one somewhere, but you can explain
I meant to have it here with me, but I don't have it. But the 727 was unique in that it was a 3-pilot cockpit, right? You had the pilot, the co-pilot, and then unusually they had what was called a flight engineer. And the flight engineer was in charge of monitoring the gauges. He was nominally in charge of communications, at least making sure everyone was on the right frequency and all of that sort of stuff. And you can visualize a cockpit. You have the pilot and the co-pilot sitting side by side facing out. And behind the co-pilot, kind of sitting 90 degrees perpendicular, is the flight engineer. And yeah, there's a great picture. And in front of that flight engineer, behind the co-pilot, is an array of gauges and a display of needles and all of these different things indicating various aspects of the aircraft. And one of those is what was called a cabin rate of climb and descent. It's also known as a vertical speed indicator. And basically it tells the flight engineer what the pressure is inside the cabin of the aircraft. And because they want to make sure that, obviously, and I've experienced this, I've flown on airplanes back in the 80s, and the pressure equalization was not as good. So when you took off or landed, you kind of get a pop in your ear pressure. You don't get that so much these days.
No, you don't. Yeah.
So it would tell the flight engineer what the pressure was like, because as you ascend, the pressure becomes less, and as you descend and get closer to the surface, it becomes greater. And so they wanted to make sure that they were maintaining the same pressure inside the cabin as you would experience on the ground, so that you wouldn't get any disturbance or distress from having unequal pressurization. So Flight 305, of course, was flying unpressurized because that bulkhead door was open and the aft stairs were deployed. So they were flying unpressurized, and they were flying at 10,000 feet, which is about the maximum before you start getting into hypoxia and oxygen depletion and lightheadedness. And we took a trip, my family and I, back in 2-3 years ago, back in the Rockies, and we drove up, ascended up about 11,000 feet, just in a car. And I got altitude sickness just from that. I mean, I was lightheaded and had a little bit of nausea and just kind of spacey. So even at 11,000 feet, I felt the effects of oxygen hypoxia. And so that 10,000 feet is about as high as you can go without feeling those effects. Mm-hmm. So they're flying unpressurized, and as the flight engineer, Harold Anderson, is watching this panel, there's a gauge called the cabin rate of climb or vertical speed. And basically it has a needle, and it's pointing to the left. And this needle usually maintains stability because it's showing that the cabin is maintaining stable pressurization, which is what they wanted. Well, this was oscillating up and down, this needle, and enough to the point where they noticed it on the gauges, but Harold Anderson has said that we did not feel it physically. We only detected it on the gauges. So it's not like they're feeling this oscillation. They're just seeing this needle move up and down. And they reported that to Northwest Airlines, and that's documented at 8:11. They called, Bill Radicek called and said, we're experiencing oscillations in the cabin rate of climb indicator. He must be doing something with the air stairs. We have that in the transcript. The full transcription of that. That proceeded for an undetermined amount of time, 2, 3, 4 minutes maybe, and then there was a sudden pressure bump, and it's described by Bill Radicek as kind of rolling up a window as you're driving down a highway, a car door thudding shut. It was a physical sensation that they felt in their ears, that they kind of felt this increase in pressure. The sled test, which occurred in January of 1972, determined that, in fact, that was caused by those air stairs slamming back up into the fuselage after the weight of the hijacker had left it. So it's kind of like a diving board. Once he jumped from that aircraft, there was no longer any weight on the bottom of those air stairs, so they slammed back up into the fuselage. Well, That works just like shutting a car door. When you shut a car door, you're increasing the pressure dramatically. And that's exactly what happened. All of that air pressure was pushed back into the cabin, and it caused that needle to bury itself in the descent gauge, because you have a climb and descent. And descent, of course, means there's high pressure because you're closer to the surface. So when that slammed shut, there was an increase in pressure, and that needle buried itself. It was described as violently buried itself on the descent gauge. And that was replicated during the sled test.
And there's there's no other time during the flight to Reno where they saw that. So,
no, in fact, once the pressure bump happened, once you had that violent needle burying itself in the descent, the oscillation stopped, and there was no further pressure bumps. Everything equaled out. They had no further pressure problems on the aircraft. So the implication of that is that the oscillations were caused by Cooper moving down the stairs, and then the pressure bump was caused with him leaving the aircraft, and that those air stairs slamming back shut into the fuselage, causing that needle to bury itself and the crew to feel that physical sensation.
Yeah, and what's interesting is I sent you this video, and so we only have one video footage of somebody jumping from the aft stairs. I think there's only one video in existence ever that I know of somebody jumping from the aft stairs, and it's from that movie, not DB Cooper. It's from The Pursuit of DB Cooper in '81. Yes, Treat Williams, the late Treat Williams. He died this year. Yep. Yeah, and in that video, you can see, and I'll play it again several times. You can see as Cooper, or as the actor playing Cooper, is coming down the stairs.
As you're showing that, I'm going to run and get my cabin rated climb.
There you go. Yeah, we can see as he's coming down the stairs, they're kind of like bouncing a little bit. You see that? They're just kind of bouncing up and down, and that is the oscillations. So the bouncing of the gauge, it was bouncing up and down. We're getting some oscillations in the cabin rate of climb indicator. We think he must be doing something with the stairs. That's exactly what they were feeling. Okay. Was Cooper going down the stairs at 8:11. Then he jumps at the pressure bump we're talking about happens 8:13, 8:14, maybe as late as 8:15. But regardless, the crew said that they sat there and talked about it, about the oscillations. And then it happened. So yes, Chris, do you have your?
Yeah, I do. So this is a cabin rate of climb indicator, and this is off of the 727-100. I'm going to bring this to DB CooperCon with me, so everybody can take a look. But you can see this needle here, point, and then it would be oscillating up and down. You can imagine that needle kind of fluttering or moving up and down.
And it's not supposed to do that.
No, it's supposed to remain stable, because that means that the pressure inside the cabin is stable. You don't want the pressure fluctuating, because it would cause distress amongst the passengers. So that is what it looks like, and you can see I think it says up and down. So
up and down. So but that's called a cabin rate of climb or descent, and some people refer to it as a VSI. I think today it's referred to as a VSI, which is vertical speed indicator. What's funny is you were talking about hypoxia and altitude. It's interesting that what's interesting about that is that we know from that radio transcripts that it was actually the security. It was the head of security for Northwest Airlines was actually on the horn with the crew, and he's like, "Hey, why don't y'all go up to about 12,500 feet slowly and try to introduce hypoxia to him. It will slow his reaction speed. Maybe he'll pass out and die. Maybe he'll fall out the stairs or something." I
have to look and see. There is I think it's 12,500 feet is where the oxygen masks deploy.
It is. Yeah. And
where they fall down in front of you, and you're supposed to put it on the person next to you before you do it yourself, or put the mask on yourself before you help the person next to you, etc. So what they didn't want to do was go high enough where the oxygen mask would deploy and alert Cooper, if he was still on the plane, that they were above 10,000 feet. So they had to be very careful to fly just high enough to maybe induce hypoxia, but not high enough where those oxygen masks would deploy.
But of course, as we know now, a complete moot point, because he had jumped in Clark County, Washington. So
yeah,
it's like, but it is interesting. One of the things that interests me the most is the fact that the FBI themselves didn't think he was going to jump. And it's like, wasn't he telegraphing that by saying, I want parachutes? Why else would he want the stairs open?
Yeah.
And want parachutes if he wasn't going to jump? So they thought he was going to be on the plane when they landed in Reno.
Yeah.
And the crew, if you listen to if you read some of the reports from the crew and some of the Northwest Airlines notes, the crew maybe thought he had jumped when the pressure bump happened, but they didn't want to risk it.
Yeah. I think they suspected or thought maybe, but they proceeded as if he was on the aircraft.
Yeah, because the guy said, "Don't come back here. I have a bomb." So,
and Bill Scott, the captain, is quoted in media reports as saying, "We didn't know if he was on the plane or not until we got to Reno." So he's quoted in several different sources as saying, we didn't know, we weren't sure if he was on a plane. And
I've got an interview, the interview that Georgia did with Harold Anderson. In that interview, Anderson says that after the pressure bump went by for a few minutes, 5-10 minutes, Radicek said, "Hey, Captain Scott," Radicek said, "Hey, should I go back there and see if he's still back there?" And Captain Scott said, "No, I think you should just stay here." So Radicek wanted to go back and look.
Yeah.
But eventually it ended up being Captain Scott who was the first one back there, because Captain Scott was an old military guy. He's, it's interesting. We talk about how, so the crew, they would alternate. So that crew had flown from Minneapolis that day. They flew from Minneapolis to Great Falls, Montana, then to Missoula, Montana, then to Spokane, and then to Portland, and then to Seattle. So they would alternate back and forth, the pilot and co-pilot, who was going to fly the plane. Now, planes almost always fly autopilot. Okay.
Yes.
Pilots, mainly what they do is take off and land. Okay.
Yeah.
And so they would alternate who was going to do this sort of stuff. And even though it was Radicek's turn to fly the plane from Seattle to Reno, and he did, it was, Captain Scott did let him take off and everything. But when they were going to land in this unusual configuration, they didn't know what was going to happen when they landed with the stairs down. They didn't know what kind of issue that might cause. So even though it's Radicek's turn, Captain Scott insisted on landing it, because he's like, "Look, this is my bird. I'm in charge of it. If we crash, it needs to be on my head, essentially." Right. So that was an old time military guys like, "Look, this is my ship. I'm going to land it." And they landed with no problems whatsoever. Barely any sparks at all from when the stairs hit.
Right. Which ground. Was a concern of theirs, obviously, because, you don't want,
they thought it might cause a fire.
You don't want sparks going around a fuel tank filled with, what?
And I'll show this video here of, you can see Cooper jumping, and this is the full shot of Cooper jumping in that show, Pursuit of DB Cooper. But look at those engines. Look how close he is to those engines there. Yeah. Like, that's insane. Just nuts how close he is. Now, as I pointed out in my video, those stairs don't slam shut in that clip there.
Sure.
Mainly, I would think, my guess is that because they weren't flying fast enough to cause that slamming. Okay. Also, that guy may not have weighed as much. Yeah. Cooper's weighed down with a lot of stuff.
And they may have jury-rigged those stairs to not slam shut out of safety for the stuntman.
Right.
Possible that they were secured in some way that didn't happen.
And what's especially interesting is the impact that causes on those stairs. We've got video. We have photographs from the sled test where we can see, and I'll try to pull this up, where we can see the skirt on the stairs. Here it is. Yeah. So if you look at the skirting here on the look above, so you see that guy with the hat there. That is Earl Milne. That's the guy in the white coat there with the hat. That's Earl Milne. That's the special agent in charge of the Seattle FBI office. He's actually talking to Harold Anderson, he's looking at Harold Anderson, who was on the sled test. He was the flight engineer on the Cooper plane. But you can see above his head there that the skirt is torn away partially. And so it happened there. And it also happened, during the actual hijacking when they landed in Reno. Let me see if I can pull it up. Yeah, here it is. I'll pull this up. When they landed in Reno, that skirt was also torn up. So let's see. Let me open this video here of the damaged air stairs. But so it's interesting that every time you fly with the aft stairs down, apparently, it's going to damage that skirting there, because we know from when they filmed The Pursuit of DB Cooper, there's one of the stunt jumpers said that a piece of the panel hit him in the legs. It came loose and hit him while he was on the stairs, which could have been dangerous. But so every time we know of the stairs flying down, see, look here. So here's the plane in Reno. There, you can see that, and that guy and that guy on the left even touches it there. You can see him there. He touches it, so it's damaged. So that's in Reno. And in this photograph, you can see above his head, the skirt is torn up. Mm-hmm. So everywhere that every time you fly with it down, the stairs are going to get screwed up. So Nikki's saying that he spoke to a guy named Ray Arnold. Yeah, Ray Arnold is the stunt jumper who did that. And Minnie Pup here says that the stairs would be aluminum, so probably not much in the way of sparks. Yeah, they weren't sure, but apparently it just nothing. Yeah, so somebody says, and by the way, Darren, there's not Darren Schaefer, but Darren Lades is a new guy. He's in our chat here. He's a new to the Cooper Vortex. Hello, good to see you. Okay, good. As somebody said, you can. It's like the Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. Mary Johns asked, how many copycats chickened out? Just one, and that's Melvin Fisher. So the other copycats never got to that point. They never got that far into it to where they had the opportunity to jump. So 6 copycats actually got money and took off again and could jump, and 5 of them did, and 1 chickened out.
So Ryan, I have a question for you along those lines. I've always considered Melvin Fisher to be the closest analog to Cooper. I know at one point you had thought that too, but I think your views on that have changed
a little bit.
If you had to pick one of the half dozen copycats to say was closest to Cooper, based on what we know about Cooper, who would you say?
Oh God, I mean, probably Heineman, maybe. I think because he did kind of sit in the back. I mean, he eventually got up. Like Heineman waited for his money for, gosh, I think 11 hours. So he had plenty of time to walk back and forth and mean mug passengers who were sitting there. But
in his demonstration, right? I mean, he was talking about blowing people's heads off, and
yeah, he got weird. But it's interesting, like the passengers weren't so afraid of him. He's a weird guy. He goes back and forth. Heineman seems to, yes, Steve Allen, I definitely agree with that assessment there, Steve. Anyway, the Heineman is interesting because sometimes he's okay and sometimes he's not. But that really speaks to his mental illness. I'm quite certain Heineman, of all the copycats, was the most mentally ill for sure. He was telling the crew where his mother was from, where his dad was from. He said he had an army waiting for him in the jungles of Honduras. He says, I have an army waiting for me down there. Like, this guy's a schizophrenic of some sort, like his mind was not there.
He was clearly off kilter mentally in a way that I don't think Cooper demonstrated. I don't think Cooper demonstrated mental illness, at least not like schizophrenia.
Now, Cooper very clearly, of all of them, the least mentally ill, I would say, are probably going to be Mac and Cooper. Now, I don't know. It's interesting if there's any, if there may be something to gain from that, is that because Mac is our only copycat who was a real criminal. When Mac was on stage at CooperCon last year, I made sure to ask him.
A career criminal.
A career criminal, yes. I made sure to ask Mac. I said, when you did this hijacking, were you already a felon? He said, yes. He already had a burglary on his record. And, when he heard about the Cooper hijacking, he was literally sitting in a car casing a Brinks truck to rob.
What a great way to make a score, he thought.
Yeah, he said, oh, wow, I could do that instead. So, kind of funny story. He's just sitting in a car and there's the radio as he's watching a Brinks truck that he's casing to go rob. So it could be that could indicate that maybe Cooper was similarly used to inconveniencing people for his own benefit, I guess, or was comfortable doing that. None of the others behaved well. Okay, Mac behaved well enough. Mac never caused any issues, didn't make anybody cry or anything.
Meaning he was comfortable committing a crime.
Yes.
It wasn't out of his wheelhouse.
No, and the other copycats were all either, I would say, crazy, like to be delicate about, not, I guess that's indelicate, but had mental illness. The others were PTSD guys. So Hetty, McCoy, LaPointe, they were all younger guys who had major PTSD going on. I believe Hetty had only been back from Vietnam for about 2 weeks. And that's something that's different when we talk about history. Talk about how in World War II, so when you signed up for World War II, all of our grandfathers or great-grandfathers who've served in World War II, when they signed up for the duration plus 6 months. Mm-hmm. Their contract said duration plus 6 months. So you're going to be in the war as long as the war goes on plus 6 months. Now, part of that is that they probably understood that after every war, there's going to be cleanup, occupations, things like that. Yeah, occupation. You can have occupation troops. But another thing about it, though, is it helped them out because it made them decompress over time. Those guys were able to hang around and chill out for 6 months with no combat.
Yeah.
Just hanging around.
Right. Well, we saw like at the Band of Brothers, which is based on a true story about Easy Company in Europe. I mean, toward the end of the war, they're playing baseball. And, I think the one guy, the captain makes a remark, until then, we're just going to suntan by the lake, So, I mean, they were given time at the very end of the war where they had a lot of downtime where they were no longer, firing rifles and throwing grenades.
Right. Yeah. And so the Vietnam guys were literally, when it was their time to go, a chopper would show up wherever their fire base was, and they would get on a chopper and then they would fly to an air base and get on a plane with a bunch of other guys and fly to San Diego or somewhere. And they're back home within 2 days. Yeah. So, I mean, they're literally in a foxhole, and then 2 days later they're back home. And that was way too much for those guys.
Yeah. And oftentimes they were coming back to, obviously the guys from World War II came back to ticker tape parades and
a hero's welcome,
getting kissed by beautiful women, on the pier as the ships arrived. Whereas, Vietnam soldiers were often greeted, with, protests and insults and that kind of stuff. So very, very different situation psychologically. Like you said, they're in the mud and the muck, and 3 days later they're getting spit on at the airport in San Francisco or Seattle. And, of note along those lines is Northwest Airlines actually had a very close working relationship with the military, and were with those planes, 727s and other Northwest flights were used to ferry soldiers to and from Vietnam back home. And oftentimes were used to carry deceased soldiers in coffins back to the States. So Northwest Airlines has a connection there as well. That's
right. And so what we were going with is that, so the only copycat who kind of was chill like Cooper and didn't outwardly express some sort of mentally ill thing was McNally. He was pretty calm. I think the only time he got upset was when the guy rammed his 727 with his car, which is understandable. That Mac would get upset with that, but that's really all that Mac. The only time he really got upset, McCoy was hostile the whole time. McCoy was very clearly, this is a problem. Yeah, Chris, I agree. McCoy, for all the people who would say that McCoy is like Cooper, he's not at all, actually. McCoy was look, McCoy was so nervous, people. He left his ransom note in the airport terminal, okay, it's just sitting there by his chair. So a gate worker.
And this was supposed to be his second go round, right?
Oh, yeah. This is your second go round. You're not going to be that, nervous. And so a gate agent walks on the plane holding an envelope high saying, "Oh, did somebody leave this in the terminal?" And he's, "Oh, let me get it." And so McCoy shows up and grabs it from them. Don't read it. Right. So, but then McCoy, was so awkward and weird and doing all this crazy stuff that they knew he was going to hijack their plane before he even started the hijacking. So, McCoy is, the pilots were like, hey, they even called out. They said, "Hey, we have a hijacker back there. We're going to fake a mechanical injury. We're going to fake a mechanical problem and land in somewhere." And they said, so the guy calls back. He's like, "So we have mechanical difficulties, and we're going to land at Grand Junction." And so when McCoy hears that, he goes, "Oh crap, I'm found out, right?" And that's when he stood up and started the hijacking. So McCoy is just not. Well, yeah,
we said Cooper's superpower was his ability to remain inconspicuous, right? Yep. To be everybody and nobody all at once. And yep. McCoy failed epically at that. He could not remain inconspicuous in any way, shape, or form.
No, and even his like clothing was crazy. He had this. The thing is, he had a totally different approach than Cooper did. Cooper wanted to be inconspicuous. McCoy was thinking what McCoy wanted to do is stand out. He wanted to be so outlandish with his clothing that they would avoid looking at him. When I made here, I'll upload this. When I made my, I did AI on the copycats a while back to generate what they looked like, because we know exactly what they were wearing. And this is as close as it comes to McCoy. So McCoy was wearing mirrored sunglasses, a floral pattern shirt, a bright yellow tie, a crazy red blazer, blue bell-bottom pants, and obviously like Groucho Marx like fake mustache, skin bronzer, and a giant wig. So
yeah, like if you were to put Ronald McDonald and make him a skyjacker, that's what he looked like.
Yeah, right. It's
yellow
ridiculous.
Tie, bright red jacket. Yeah. So
right. Whereas, as we mentioned, Heineman, we talked about Heineman was a lot like Cooper. Heineman's wearing this. Heineman's wearing Cooper clothes, essentially.
Yeah.
Right. And so the only difference in him and Cooper is Heineman wore gloves, which is. But as we think, Cooper, all the copycats wore gloves that I know of. Cooper did not. But as we've discussed before, Cooper likely did something to his fingerprints to obfuscate them, maybe glue. And I remember asking John Detler, the FBI agent who was there at the scene. I said, "Hey, back in the 60s and 70s, did criminals do that? Did they actually like put glue on their fingers?" He goes, "Yes, absolutely."
Yeah,
he goes, totally. I think the Zodiac may have done that too, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, the Zodiac claims he did. He said, he kind of mocked the police and said, "You don't have my fingerprints because I wore," he described it was the model airplane glue. Model airplanes were big back in the day. I mean, even 40 years ago growing up, people made model airplanes and they'd use like special glue out of these little things and little tubes. And Zodiac claimed that he put model airplane glue on his fingertips to, kind of obfuscate his fingerprints. So Did he do that? Who knows?
Right.
We certainly don't have very good fingerprints for him.
Right. Yeah, there's a weird. So Darren, he's new to the Cooper world. He's saying that he says, I have a belief that DB Cooper's plan only extended to the point of getting the money, and then after that, I think he was winging it. Well, yeah, I mean, it is weird that of all the copycats, he was very nonchalant about his directions. He just said, he let them decide, basically. They could have flown anywhere. For all of us talking about V-23 and stuff, I mean, they didn't have to follow V-23. Maybe they could have gone a different route. He didn't know. So there is I'll say, just for the sake of argument, there is some thought. This is our researcher, Flyjack. This is his theory that now Flyjack believes that Heinemann was Cooper. So there is a Heinemann bias in this, implicit. But his theory isn't totally mad, in my opinion. His thought is that, so Cooper did not understand. Apparently, Cooper did not realize that they would have to refuel. Okay. He said, fly to Mexico City and don't land anywhere in the U.S. to refuel. He says that. So original demand, fly to Mexico City and don't land in the U.S. before then. Well, the crew comes back and says, well, we can't even get close to the border. I mean, Reno is not really close to the border. We can't get close to the border of Mexico without refueling. And Cooper's like, oh, my bad. So they really call Cooper out on that. And Flyjack's theory is that Cooper wanted to jump in Mexico somewhere because Heinemann jumps in Honduras, okay? And that, there would be less authorities. The federales in Mexico aren't going to be as good as the FBI or American law enforcement, probably. So the thought was that Cooper, and remember, Cooper was described as having a Latin appearance. One passenger said he had a Mexican appearance. So possibly, from down that area. So his theory is that Cooper was going to jump near Mexico or in Mexico. Okay. But when he realized that they had to stop to refuel somewhere, he's like, oh crap, they're going to have 3 hours to prepare an ambush on me. Because when we land, wherever we land, and see, remember, when they're discussing where to refuel, Cooper, they keep throwing out suggestions. They say, well, we can refuel in San Francisco. Cooper goes, no, that's too busy. They say, what about LA? No, that's too busy. He keeps rejecting airports for being too busy. Okay. And in this theory, what he's doing is he's like, well, he didn't want to land in somewhere where there's a giant FBI presence or giant law enforcement presence because they would have a better chance of ambushing him. So they agree on Reno, but then Cooper's like, I'm still worried about being ambushed. So I'm just going to jump as soon as I can. And that'll give the longest amount of time between when they land, wherever they're going to land, and when I jump. Right. And so that their thought is that he just, and that's why he seemed to be winging it, because he had no idea about, and another point too, is that Heinemann and all the copycats, they did not give specific flight directions until they took off again with the money. That was something that they did. So perhaps Cooper had specific degrees and bearing that he wanted them to fly that would put him closer to Mexico. He would give them the plan and say, I want you to be on this degrees or whatever, and because he decided to jump early, he just had to wing it. So that could explain the real incongruence of why he seems to have his head on straight before the money. And then after the money, he totally seems to be winging it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess that takes a lot of presumption into Cooper's mindset.
Right.
I mean, where you're just playing guessing games at that point in terms of his thought process. The other thing is Mexico is not Honduras. Those are two, Mexico is a huge country with different terrain, mountains and deserts and swamps and jungle. So, just to say, well, Mexico, Honduras, same thing. Well, that's not really true. So, I don't know. I have some doubts about that, and he didn't jump right away. He waited 30 plus minutes to jump.
Coincidentally, he jumps right where he started.
Yeah.
To me, that seems to indicate,
yeah,
that was his plan all along.
Right.
Was to get basically back to where he started,
and
back to where his transportation was.
Yeah, and he wanted those stairs down as soon as possible. He didn't want any delay in getting the stairs down. So, I think all of that points to him wanting to jump. I
but the
tend
argument
to
against
as soon as possible, close to Seattle. But I don't discount the idea that he wanted to jump, near Portland. The only thing is then you're getting back into making presumptions about his thought process. And, I'm going to wait. There's no guarantee. My point is that he didn't know what route they were taking south. He knew they were going south, but there were a few different routes that they could have taken, low altitude airways, Victor Airways that they could have taken. If you want to do 4-dimensional chess, he could have probably narrowed down which ones. But
I don't think so either. Yeah, I don't think he's that advanced.
No, I don't either. And so he's guessing essentially where that plane is going to be at a particular time. And, did he luck out? Maybe, maybe he's like, oh, damn, there's Portland, that's gotta be Portland. But
sure.
Did he think that the plane was going to fly right over Portland? I tend to not think that, because he didn't have any, he's just like, send me to Reno, and
when again, it's cloud cover. I mean, how would he?
Yeah. So it's raining, there's cloud cover, it's night. So there are a lot of things pointing to him. I think just sort of winging that jump and saying, all right, now's the time. Who knows what he was doing for those 30 minutes? I don't know.
Well, what's weird about that is that the only other copycat who really, Mac ended up jumping not where he wanted to jump, because Mac got thrown up. Mac's plan got thrown off because of the having to change 727s. He got distracted. It was a weird thing with Mac. But Mac had an idea of where he wanted to jump and wasn't able to jump there. But all the other copycats jumped where they wanted to jump, basically. Yeah. So,
and Mac was way off in thinking where he thought he was jumping over Lake Michigan.
Yeah, which is weird. It's like,
and he ended up being like near Peoria, Illinois,
that hit Mac saying that always. I need to get Mac on the show for everybody. I think people would like that. But because I want to ask him that. Oh, I think I just lost Chris. So here he's coming. There he is. We lost you for a second there. But I want to ask Mac about it. So, by the way, Alan K just says, I just made my kids a Martin McNally and cheese. So that'd be great. Mac did say he thought he was jumping over Lake Michigan. But other times, though, he says he was able to look down. And he says, I saw street lights. I could see that there was civilization down there, but not a lot. Mm-hmm. And that was and that's always been my thing about him jumping in orchards or somewhere like that, is that it's a sweet spot. You're not too close to Vancouver, Portland, where you're going to land on a cop car at a 4-way stop, but you're not far enough away from it where you're going to land in, 1,000 acres of trees. So it's like you want a sweet spot where you can come down and nobody's going to see you. And really, if you look at it, that's kind of where the other ones did. McCoy jumps south of Provo in a place called maybe Springdale or somewhere like that. I forget what that town's called, but he jumped where he wanted to jump, but it wasn't nobody saw him land. Nobody saw any of these guys land. Let's point that out, that nobody ever saw a copycat land except for LaPointe, who jumped during the daytime, which is weird. And he was followed down by a chase plane that circled around him as he's in a parachute. And LaPointe's like giving the plane the finger as it's coming down. LaPointe didn't do a very good job of this. But hey, Darren Schaefer. By the way, Darren Schaefer has a new podcast out today, which is great. A new Cooper Vortex just dropped.
Mike
Halkovich. Yep. But I don't know. Here's the thing about Cooper. It would not have hurt him at all to say fly V-23. Like that would have, V-23 goes all the way to somewhere in California. I forget exactly where it goes. Maybe somewhere.
It goes all the way to Victor 23 goes all the way to San Diego.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, so he could have said fly V-23, because it's not like everyone, unless you're Eric Eulis, everyone knew where the plane was, right? That was nobody is going to think they're not going to know where the plane is. So I'm not going to the issue is going to be, it was always going to be when you jump, not so like them knowing where the plane is at all times is going to be irrelevant.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why the other copycats gave them specific flight degrees to follow and things, because you can't hide a plane from radar. So
yeah. And the peculiar thing about this hijacking too is the region of the country that he chose to hijack it from. I mean, yeah, clearly there are reasons that the Pacific Northwest was chosen, but in terms of just doing a skydive at night, you've got the Cascades on one side, you've got the Pacific Ocean on another side.
Yeah.
Both of those are not great areas to jump in. Maybe he assumed that they would, at that altitude, kind of fly down that valley, and kind of, along that. But
that's an assumption.
Again, we're assuming and the thing is, Cooper did a lot of things that didn't make sense. We expect people to act logically, and in retrospect, we think, well, why did they do this? Why didn't they do that? So, people sometimes just don't do what we expect them to do. Cooper, when he was given the money bag, should have demanded a knapsack. He didn't. He took the long way around. When he was cutting the paracord, he cut it at the knots instead of just kind of snipping each line. He did a lot of things that don't quite make sense. So, I think, reading too much into his mindset and his logic, might be folly.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yes, Bill Rollins is talking about how V-23 was the only logical route for them to fly on. Sure, it was. But the problem is, he could have just said that to guarantee that he's going to jump where he wants to jump. He could have said that, and he would have suffered no disadvantage whatsoever by saying follow V-23. None. Because, again, the plane is not going to disappear off radar, right? So the flight path, they know, all the other copycats gave directions. So let's see.
Yeah. Is Victor 23 is not the only logical one. You have Victor 27, which is just a little bit longer, but it takes you the same route. So, Victor 23 is the best one, but it's not the only one.
Yeah, and we have that in the transcripts. They're discussing it back and forth, saying, well, which one do we want to go with? Well, we think V-23 is the safest, really.
Yeah.
And yeah, so for those who don't know, if an airway says Victor, it's a low altitude airway. It's below 19,000 feet, I think. It's a jetway if it's above it.
Yeah, it's usually for Cessnas and Piper Cubs and those types of things that can't go 5 miles in the air.
Right, and so that's another thing about this whole flight path stuff. About the problem with alternate flight path people like Eric Eulis and stuff. It's just ridiculous because they always knew where that plane was at all times. And it's just Ed talks about how they discussed flying out over the ocean. They did. Radicek said, hey, can you put us on a route that goes to Reno over the ocean, sort of? Can you kind of dogleg us out into the ocean? Because I want this guy to jump over the ocean. And Northwest Orient shit cans the idea and says, well, no, let's not do that. Yeah. Steve, Springville, I think, is the town for McCoy. I think it's south of Provo.
The problem with flying over the ocean or along the coast is that it restricts your options if there's an emergency. So if he detonates the bomb and there's a gaping hole in your aircraft, all you can do is go left. All you can do is go east. So where you can't go out over the ocean, in case of emergency. That's the last place you want. So it restricts your options if there's an emergency or if they have to make an emergency landing.
Good point.
Flying over land like Victor 23 at least provides you the options to go east or west, or in order to make some type of emergency maneuvers.
Right. Okay. So we have a question here. C. Watson says, maybe I have missed this before. Did the Mount St. Helens eruption cover the drop zone, thereby making discovery of a parachute or body impossible after 1980? No. It was too far. It didn't go that far west.
Yep.
And it blew east. I mean, all the ash blew east anyway. Most of it. I mean, I think there's people like Rose Ellis. I don't know if Rose is in the chat, but Rose is a lifelong Portlandian, and no, there was some ash on the ground in Portland area, but anything that was buried is going to be east.
Nothing that would obscure a parachute or a body or a money bag.
Yeah. So yeah, there you go. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, Jude says the Pacific Northwest stinks for skydiving. He could have picked somewhere else. Well, I mean, I think it speaks to his familiarity with the area where he jumped, because again, all the copycats jumped where they wanted to jump. McCoy jumped precisely where he wanted to jump. He had scoped out that area in a small plane ahead of time to get a orientation of what the lights look like at night. Hetty jumped where he wanted to jump. So I really don't think there's any, even though Cooper's winging it, I still think he had an idea of where he wanted to jump. And I just don't think it's a coincidence that he jumps right back where he started. Like that kind of makes sense to me.
Completely makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I can't argue with that logic. That makes sense. Yeah, for sure. Somebody
asked you earlier, Chris, they said, are you still in the Cooper dead camp?
I'm agnostic.
Yeah.
Neither would surprise me. Neither would surprise me. If somebody held a flamethrower to my forehead, I'd probably say he died, but I'm not betting my life on it. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's true.
Darren, I see Jay here saying the flight path can't be proven. Well, it can. We have the SAGE radar returns from the U.S. Air Force.
Jay. No.
It's absurd. The plane flew down Victor 23. We have all kinds of technical and anecdotal evidence to suggest that it flew down Victor 23. Eric is not correct.
No,
it's been discussed ad nauseum, and any alternate flight path has been completely debunked.
Yeah, it just is. I mean, it's like, it's not even, I mean, eventually I guess I'm going to have to do a video on the flight path, I guess. Just to like point people to it and say, look, this is why.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't seem to die, but hopefully the pressure bump thing. And in fact, I had a few converts. There was a guy in the comments who said I was somebody who thought maybe Cooper hit on the plane, but now I don't see how it's possible.
Yeah, so, yeah. No, it's not. I mean, it's just not. There's a preponderance of evidence suggesting that he jumped, and it's impossible for him to have escaped on the ground.
Yeah, and again, as I said, like, the only way to cause a pressure bump is for a very large weight to be removed. What weight was he removing? And again, for him to get out at a later point, he would have caused a second pressure bump.
Yeah.
Like there's no way to leave that plane without causing a pressure bump.
And if you're trying to say that he was manipulating the stairs to throw off the FBI, nobody knew about pressure bumps. Like, nobody knew that jumping from the air stairs caused a pressure bump. Right. Nobody knew that walking down the air stairs caused oscillations in the cabin rate of climb. Right. That was been known until January of 1972.
Yes.
When Northwest Airlines and the U.S. Air Force and the FBI conducted a test to verify it.
Yeah, so I mean, the fact that Northwest Airlines, their eggheads, and the Air Force eggheads had to test it.
Yeah.
Is proof that nobody knew about it.
And you're suggesting that Cooper knew, but nobody else involved knew, and he was playing four-dimensional chess with the air stairs. It beggars the imagination.
Right, and he knows all this, but doesn't know that they have to refuel, or doesn't, some of these other things. No, he didn't know from military experience, Point Nemo. Like, what military? Again, let me bring it up. The guys who jumped from 727s over Southeast Asia, they jumped using a friggin' a ramp.
They slid down. They did not jump from the stairs. So
right,
would not have known about oscillations or pressure bump from military experience or Air America or anything like that.
Right. Let me actually let me try to pull that up. If I can find that video of the guys doing this. Let me try to find this. Oh, where is it? I've got a video somewhere of the guys jumping. So
Yeah, they literally slid down like a child slides down on a playground slide. And that's
Yeah. I
how
mean,
that's how the Air America guys exited the 727 in Southeast Asia.
yeah. I mean, it's in my video. I mean, it's somewhere, but no, they went down a ramp. I mean, so the air stairs were removed before those operations. So
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, he didn't know from military experience. Cause I mean, yeah, he knew, I mean, you could say he knew that they were flying at 15-degree flaps and gear down,
Right.
because Air America they were doing that. And I think that, to me, that seems to be really weird. I mean, that's bizarre. The fact that Air America was doing that with 727s, 15-degree flaps, gear down. And you said the other day that gear down doesn't even matter.
I have spoken with several pilots who flew 727-100s, pilots with over, combined 100 years experience, who've said that they are befuddled as to why Cooper requested the landing gear down, because having the landing gear down just creates drag, but it does not limit the airspeed of the aircraft. The only thing that would do that are the flaps. So essentially, the landing gear being down was an unnecessary redundancy. So I'm curious to ask maybe Mr. Gossett at DB CooperCon, this is a question that I'm going to ask him, is why did the Air America guys fly with the landing gear down if it had nothing to do with airspeed or limiting airspeed? Did it have something to do maybe with possibly needing to land at a moment's notice in an emergency or something like that? I don't know. I'm guessing. But yeah, 727 pilots that I've spoken with are very confused as to why the landing gear was requested to be down, because it really gained nothing for Cooper in terms of limiting the airspeed or anything. It just, all it did was create drag, which created more fuel consumption, which was contrary to what he wanted.
Yeah, and we've got some people, who is it? Alan and Jay are talking about he could have jumped at a later time. No, because he would have caused a pressure bump. There's no way to leave out the stairs without causing a pressure bump.
Yeah.
There was only one pressure bump that happened. I mean, stop thinking that Cooper is a wizard. He's not Gandalf the Grey. Yeah. Okay. He's not James Bond. No. He was a crook.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a criminal guy. Maybe he was Verdal and was a secret genius. Who knows? Maybe he was Ted Braden, Commando, Rambo, but probably not. Like, the guy was a hijacker, okay, and who had aviation-ish experience.
Yeah, and Point Nemo said drag limit speed. You don't need the landing gear down. You just need the flaps down. So the landing gear, again, was an unnecessary redundancy. He didn't need to request it. And all it did, in fact, was create more fuel consumption, which is contrary to what he wanted. So him requesting landing gear down, by every 727 pilot I've talked to, which is numerous, have said that they are confused as to why that was requested.
Well, somebody said, and see, Point Nemo points this out, and this is what I always thought, is that the gear down limited how fast they could fly. It gave an upper limit because the gear would tear off probably at a certain.
But flaps do that already, so you don't need the landing gear down to do that. So you're again, it's an unnecessary. It's a redundancy that you don't need. The flaps do the job that the landing gear being down does. So that's why every 727 pilot is like, I don't understand why he asked for that down. It really didn't do anything.
Yeah. There's just, but again, the guy jumped when he jumped. The problem is every minute they're going 3 miles. So we don't know when he jumped.
Right. So, yep. Yeah. And I at DB CooperCon, I'm going to offer a presentation that offers suggestions and maybe some food for thought. But I've been in this case long enough to know there's no such thing as proof. And, Tom Kay published an article in Nature on the diatoms, and there are still people who question that. So to think that I'm going to get up there and DB CooperCon and provide a presentation is going to convince everyone, I'm not that foolish. So I'm going to offer some new information, hopefully, and maybe a new perspective on things. But that's about all all I can hope for. But in regards to the landing gear, requesting the landing gear down can suggest one of two things. Number one, that he didn't have any aviation knowledge and he thought that the landing gear did something that it didn't. Or, as you said, he was an Air America guy and that was the configuration they flew in. So he just assumed that that was the configuration he had to fly in to pull this off. So, you know, who knows? Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. And see, Big Woody just asked, whatever happened to the guy from West Memphis that moved to Portland less than a month before the DB Cooper caper and was found under the influence in the drop zone? What did he die from that year? I have no idea, but he's dead in March of 72.
Hotel? Guy a hotel in Denver?
No, that's not the guy. No, that's a different guy.
Different guy.
Yeah, that's the other guy who it drives me mad, because if that guy was 20 years older, I would be convinced that guy was Cooper. But no, this guy this was suspect number one. Thomas Johnston was his name. He was a bank robber from Alabama who was convicted of a bunch of bank robberies up in like Minnesota somewhere, and was on parole and was living in West Memphis, Arkansas, which is across the Mississippi River from Arkansas. Many folks know West Memphis because of the West Memphis 3 case, but he's living in West Memphis. And basically the very first tip the FBI got, one of the very earliest ones, was the FBI office in Little Rock got a call that said, hey, there was a guy who was living here recently who was a bank robber who suddenly got obsessed with skydiving, and you should look into him. That's all they said. So the FBI is like, okay, we have this guy's name. They go to West Memphis. They go to the post office, because that's where you get addresses from. And they say, hey, will you give us this guy's address? And they said, oh, well, he started having his mail forwarded to Portland last month. So like October of 71, this bank robber who's 48 years old, who suddenly takes up skydiving, is moving to Portland. And they're going, oh, shit, this must be Cooper. And they had determined that he had bought flight maps of like Seattle and Portland area. So he had bought flight maps of that area. And you're like, oh my God. So, but at 2 p.m, right as Flight 305 is flying overhead, he is arrested at like 2:10 or something for drunk driving in Woodland. So it literally right in the drop zone, he's arrested for drinking and driving, and ends up dying in Portland in March of 72. He's only 48 years old. It's like, so if you have a conspiratorial mind or just a thought mind, you could say, well, maybe this was Cooper's accomplice who, got drunk, because he was a drunk, and in the drop zone, and he was going to be waiting around somewhere, and then got arrested, while he was waiting.
To the person's point, what ended up happening to him?
I don't know. He has a daughter, and I thought about trying to contact her and saying, hey, what did your dad die from? Because
if they eliminated him as a suspect because of the timing of his arrest.
He was sitting in jail. Yeah. When what's funny is they didn't know that for several days. But
so did they ever question him in regards to the case?
No, because they just assumed, so they showed his photograph. His photograph was in the first set of photographs shown to the stewardesses, like the next day or whatever. And they said, no, that's not him. So then they later found out, oh, by the way, he was also sitting in jail in Woodland at the time. So, but that's a weird coincidence, yeah. I would say.
And if not for his arrest, he would make extremely compelling suspect.
Absolutely.
And I think that goes to show you that there can be a lot of really great looking suspects that are not Cooper. That people who at face value are like, wow, this has got to be the guy. Like there are so many, so much circumstantial evidence that's lining up. It's got to be him. It's got to be him. Got to be him. And then he's not. So, temporary, anybody who's a suspect person and falls in love with a suspect, and I would counsel them, just temper your expectations and find reasons to eliminate them.
Yeah, right. And so I'll just comment on the latest vault drop. The only thing, so right now in the vaults, we're going through the suspect files. So it's nothing really interesting like it used to be. Like it used to be that when there were actual case stuff going on, every page could be something really interesting about the case that we didn't know about. Like, you never knew the next page might have something more detail about his shoes or something, right? But now we're into the suspect files. And really, to me, the only real interest that I find in the suspect files is usually they have comments on the suspect's photograph. So when whatever suspect they're going through in the FBI files that are being released, they always show their photograph to the stewardesses. And even though we have the sketches, to me, more important than the sketches are the comments that they keep making when they eliminate. So what I'm saying is they would show a suspect. They would show a suspect's photograph to a stewardess, and we have that stewardess in the FBI files. We have their comments. They're saying, well, that guy's not him because yada, yada, yada. And for example, today, or in the most recent one, Don Burnworth, who is a guy I always liked as a suspect. We have Don Burnworth for the first time appearing in these vault releases, and we can see what they said about Don Burnworth's photograph. So there we go. So right there on the screen, there's Don Burnworth, and we got Tina Mucklow saying that Burnworth is younger looking and more handsome than the hijacker.
Good grief.
Handsome to me. I know. Florence Schaffner says Burnworth.
I'm no looker, but that guy's pretty homely to me.
Yeah, no kidding. And this is Schaffner advised that Burnworth was too young looking and also too good looking. Robert Gregory says this guy's jawline, cheeks, and nose bore a resemblance to Cooper. Cord Spreckle says concerning Burnworth, he stated that if the individual were 10 years older, there would be a resemblance between Burnworth and the hijacker. So you see, these sort of things are really what we're gaining from the suspect files are just more things like that. Things where, for example, I harp on this a lot, but like they talk about Cooper's nose all the frickin' time in these. They eliminate suspects, the witnesses, damn near every time. You'll see them say that guy's nose is too big to be Cooper. So like Cooper probably had a weird ass nose because again, if we look at, the Bing sketch here, that nose is really weird looking. But as I've said a million times, the sketch artist didn't invent that nose.
Right.
That nose was drawn according to what the stewardesses told him to draw it. So Cooper had a little nose. And Cooper was not a good looking guy. We even have male passengers who were like, that suspect is too good looking to be Cooper. We've got that. So even the male passengers are getting in on the Cooper was ugly stuff. So I think that, Cooper was, interesting. By the way, one thing that was interesting about Don Burnworth is that I did learn this in the files, that the Wichita State football team's plane crashed famously.
The Wichita Crows, I believe.
The what?
I think it's the Wichita Crows, isn't it?
Yeah, the team. Yeah, the Wichita. Yeah, that team died. They all died on a plane crash. And the FBI files talk about how Burnworth actually flew. He's the one who ferried that plane to where it was used for the crew or for that flight. So he was questioned extensively by the FAA about that.
Huh.
Like, did you?
I stand corrected. It's not the Crows. It's the Wichita State Shockers.
Shockers. Oh, that's right. The Shockers. Yeah, people love that because of the Dane Cook stuff lately. So they say the Shockers.
Comment.
Yeah, no comment. Yeah.
PG, buddy.
Yeah. But Burnworth, though, I've always liked him, and you can see why they like him in the FBI files, because this guy was a pilot of 727s and wasn't particularly well liked by his own airline. when we've got two guys, Burnworth and Fred Catalano, who their own airline turned them in.
Yeah.
So when your bosses turn you in thinking you're a hijacker, maybe you're not the best coworker. So they turned Burnworth in, and Burnworth had kidnapped his kids, actually. Not kidnapping, but he was going through a divorce. And I believe it was July of 71, he takes his kids and goes to Germany. And he's in Germany until August of 72 when he's arrested. He comes back to America and is arrested. But so, there was some thought that maybe he could have snuck back into America somehow, being a pilot and still having a pilot's credentials and things. That'd be a great alibi. Say, well, I was in Germany for a year, it couldn't have been me. So that always intrigued me. But now we have the stewardesses, seeing his photograph and saying, nah, not him.
Yeah, them telling why he's not Cooper.
And why. Yeah. And it's like the McCoy thing. We've got them saying why it's not McCoy. It's not as well, not him. It's like McCoy's nose is too big. McCoy his hair is too thin. It's
young or whatever.
Too young looking. Yeah. Yeah. They,
so kind of along those lines, Ryan, I hate to hijack the show, but
you're fine.
Talking about DB CooperCon, Seattle, November 15th to the 17th.
Yes.
Tickets still available, dbcooperevents.com. You're going to be doing a presentation, and you're going to be doing a presentation on secrets and surprises in the FBI files. Kind of little interesting,
nuggets,
surprising nuggets that people may not know about. You want to give us a little hint or preview of the types of things you're going to be talking about?
I don't even know. In fact, like I said, you put him on the spot. I haven't had nothing prepared, because really what I'm reserving that spot for is I'm desperately trying to get John Detler, who is the only surviving original case agent. He lives in Seattle. He's 83, but I am desperately trying to get him to come. And I think he may. I'm trying to get him to come because John Detler, all the photos we have of, for example, this photograph right there that's during the sled test. That's Harold Anderson in profile at his engineer's spot where he was sitting in that same chair during the hijacking. That photograph was taken by John Detler. So, and we can see in this photograph here of the sled test guys, there's John Detler on the far left, the short guy.
Yep.
So we can see these are the guys at the sled test. It is funny that we're such nerds. I'm trying to think that, so you and I have talked to 3 of these people. You've spoken to Anderson and Spangler, and I've spoken to Detler. So it's interesting that in this photograph, the only ones really who we know are still alive, really, Farrell died in the early 2000s. And I know that David Saiz, I found his obituary. He died in 2009.
And Milne is dead.
Yeah. Milne's long dead. But that's something that's interesting. That is an interesting thing. And in fact, I'm going to find that real quick. It was posted in our group, and there's a plug for everybody. I want everybody to know this. So there is the DB Cooper Mystery Group. We've got 2 DB Cooper Facebook groups, both equally valid. There is the one that many of you may be in. That's the DB Cooper Mystery Group. But we also have my group, which I started, which is we call it the official DB Cooper Mystery Group. So if you're on Facebook, please go. I will pull it up here. Please go and find the official DB Cooper group. Let me pull up a graphic here that shows the cover of it. Here we go. Look here. So there, that's what it looks like. Find that, the official DB Cooper group. If you join, just refresh your page. You have to request to join, but it automatically makes you join. So just refresh the page when you click join. So please join the official DB Cooper group. Need more people. But in that group, Chris Brower, our bloodhound, posted an article that, there we go. Tim Willie asked to join the official DB Cooper group. So hello, Tim. I just saw you on my phone. You're watching. Good to meet you. But so we've got Earl Milne, who was the special agent in charge of the office that was in charge of the investigation. after he retired, he's giving he's talking to the media about some of his famous cases, because he was in charge of the Seattle FBI office for like 23 years or something like this, a long time. So when he retired, he did an article. He gave an interview to a local paper, and I had never found this article. And I've looked for all things Milne, and Chris Brewer found it. And Milne believes Cooper got away with it. He says, I think Cooper got away with it. Well, again, every FBI agent I've talked to personally, other than Larry Carr, thinks got away with it too. But Milne says, I believe Cooper got away with it. And he gave 3 reasons to the media. He said, I'll just read it. Number 1, a Boeing 727, which Cooper commandeered, is one of the safest planes to jump from. Number
True.
2, the area over which Cooper jumped between Woodland and Vancouver features wide open spaces, which is ideal for parachute landings.
True. In fact, there's a DZ there, unofficial.
Right.
What's the name of it? Oh, goodness. It's right on the tip of my tongue. What's the name of it?
Shoals
Air Park. Yep. Shoals.
And third, he goes, a 20-mile-an-hour wind was blowing that night, but no wind was blowing at ground level, and visibility was excellent, he says. I don't know about that. But that's what he says. Now, there is a report where Soderlund, who is the flight ops guy for Northwest, sends a memo to the FBI saying, hey, I've talked to the crew again, and they said that they could see distinctive lights on the ground.
Yeah.
So now I don't know if that means seeing the glow through the clouds, right?
Or could they see, for example, I wonder, they talk about this distinctive, like I wonder if they could see the lights of the cars on the I-5 bridge.
Right. Which
like that, where there's, or the lights from the airport, where you see the runway lights, from,
right. And it does say, look, the weather report says the clouds were scattered. So, there may have been breaks in the clouds.
There were 3 layers of clouds?
Yeah.
And it was raining and it was at night. So again, I think we have a very incomplete picture of what the pilots could see that night as they approached Portland. Was it just a murky, hazy glow of lights through the clouds, or could they actually make out distinctive features like the Columbia River, for example? I don't know the answer to that. We would have to speak to Bill Radachek or Harold Anderson to get some insight into what exactly they could see out their window. Otherwise, we're just sort of guessing.
We are educated guesses, because the fact that they were able to say we were in the outskirts of Portland or whatever, they knew roughly where they were by sight, I would think.
Yeah, I talked to 727 pilot. I won't give his name because I don't want to disrespect his privacy, but he said that that they used to play a game on flights where guess the city, where they would be flying and they would be approaching an area of illumination, and they would try to guess just based on dead reckoning what city that was. As he pointed out too, the Pacific Northwest was their bread and butter for Northwest Airlines, and it was a heavily traveled route, that area, that region. So, they would certainly have an idea geographically of where they were. I think they would have a pretty good sense where they were.
Sure. And I want to show.
Yeah, I think the descriptions that they provided in terms of where he jumped were probably pretty good.
Right. And I want to show, Nikki pointed out, and he's right, that on the FBI, on the flight path map provided by the Air Force to the FBI, we call it the Air Force map. It's an Air Force map that they made. But on that map, you can see, Nikki pointed out, you can see a little logo of a parachute.
Yep.
It's right there. It's kind of hard to see, but right where it says Orchards, right above the D or Orchards.
Yep.
There is a little parachute guy there.
Yep. And you can see above that it says Shoal, which is Shoal Field. Yep,
Shoal. Yep. So, yeah, right there. And then there's Battleground. So really, for me, I know you favor a little bit further south, DZ, but for a lot of for the FBI, this is where they think Cooper jumped, in between Battleground and Orchards.
Yeah.
That's their thought currently. They've amended their thought on where he jumped to being this area here.
Yeah. And to be perfectly honest, we're splitting hairs. I mean,
it's
about a difference of a couple minutes, which is about 6 miles. So, I mean, we're trying to thread a needle here. And I think the best we can say is that he probably jumped somewhere between Battleground and the Columbia. I mean, if we be, magnanimous about it, I think between Battleground and the Columbia is probably a safe guess.
Right. And we've also got, let me bring up this photograph here. So for those wondering, our bloodhound again found a wonderful photograph of Orchards from, here it is. Okay. So this is Orchards in September of 71, this photograph here. We can see there. So it's wide open, right? And these arrows are pointing to these sand or gravel pits that were in these large sand pits that were in Orchards. And I mean, it's weird, but I mean, that could have some connection to Tina Bar somehow, maybe.
I have not dismissed that. Brower and I worked on that for a bit, and I thought it was a very, very intriguing theory that the money somehow ended up in those pits. And was covered and then somehow taken to Tina Bar by truck or by barge and deposited there. I haven't that outright.
Yeah. And Bill Rollins. Hey, Bill, by the way, this is the Joe Lakich suspect fella. Bill's a pilot too. Bill, though, says, he's commenting, he says that I believe in the transcripts, the pilot stated they were in the soup. No, that's not in the transcripts. That's Bill says that. Bill Radicek says that in his speech to Northwest Museum
Historical Center. Yeah.
In 2013. So that's not the soup is not in the no. So that's not listed. So
the best we have in terms of the weather is what the FBI released for Portland at 8
o'clock. Yeah. Which is 3 layers of cloud cover, mostly scattered. Nothing crazy. So let's see. Yeah, let's see. And Tina said it was murky too. Now, Tina's visibility was bad. Tina was not in a good spot to see out the windows. And also, let's not forget their windows were icing up too. Until they got into California, they were concerned about the icing on the windows because, see, normally you fly above condensation like that. But when you're flying at 10,000 feet, there's more moisture, essentially.
There was a ridiculous amount of ice, too. They gave measurements on how much ice was on the windows. I'll see if I can pull that up.
Oh, it was like, they said it was several inches, like creeping into the middle of their window.
It was inches thick.
Yeah. So it wasn't good, but I mean, they were worried about it, that it was going to screw up the aerodynamics of the plane. Because I mean, their de-icers something about their de-icers were malfunctioning on their wings. So they couldn't, handle that. But anyway, yeah. So that's what we're dealing with is that even the guy in charge of the FBI office says he thinks that Cooper survived. And like I said, the guys that I've talked to Bob Furman and Detler, who were around that time, and they both think he lived.
Yeah.
Because they just feel like they would have found something.
It's certainly not out of the realm of possibility that he lived. As I said, I'm sort of straddling the fence, but I if he did jump between Battleground and Columbia, as we presume that he did, somewhere along there, that's basically flat, rural, countryside. It's not hilly, it's not mountainous, it's not rugged. It's cow pastures and backyards.
And I'm going to bring up too your map that you made. So Chris made this map where he calculated where the plane was at any given time. So, because a lot of people think 8:13 to 8:14 is when Cooper jumped. You can see right there at 8:13, they're right over battleground. At 8:14, they are right over that. Was it a vortex? Is it a DME? Is
Battleground.
At Orchards, is that that like red mark? I think that's a DME maybe, or I'm not sure what those are called, but regardless, between 8:13 and 8:14 is when most people think he jumped. Maybe 8:15 a little later, but that's Chris's map there. And it is weird that, so they did seem to dogleg, or they kind of moved around so I'll pull up another map here. So I'll add a map here where I overlaid Victor 23 with the flight path that was created by the Air Force. So this map here, if you're watching on a big enough TV, I guess, you can see there that highlight, what is highlighted is V23, okay? And you can see the airport down there near the bottom. And that turn, where that turn is Orchards. So they turned, I guess that's 45 degrees.
So they would have turned right around battleground. That's when they would have made that little dog leg.
Yeah. And
the problem is they were a couple miles east of the center line of Victor 23 at that point. So they kind of had to, I don't want to use the word overcorrect, but they had to correct.
Yeah, and you can see down there at the bottom. Let me pull up another map. You can see down there at the bottom that they do kind of skirt around the airport. So like the airport is where those like lines are that are like purple looking.
Yep.
That's the airport.
Yep.
And you can see that normally V23, you can see on the highlight there, would go right over the airport, like right overhead the airport. V23 would do that. But they, I guess for safety reasons or whatever, I don't know why they did that, but they did fly a little bit west at that point of V23. And then they got back on course right after that. So that seems like on purpose, they flew around the airport.
I tell you this, I talked with that pilot, and I asked him specifically about autopilot. And of course, there's been a lot of debate about whether or not the plane was flying on autopilot or whether it was being hand flown out of Seattle. And every pilot that I've spoken with has said that there is no reason for them to be hand flying that aircraft, that the autopilot at that time, even in that configuration, could very capably handle any disruptions and quote unquote flying dirty that the plane was doing, that the autopilot was perfectly capable of handling that, and it was unnecessary for them to hand fly the aircraft. To underscore that, they've even said that the autopilot would be preferable because they had so many things going on in the cockpit in terms of communication and everything going on, monitoring the hijacker in the back, etc., that it would be one less thing for them to think about in having to hand fly the aircraft. They could just put it on autopilot and then handle other things that were pressing in that matter, and that it would not have any impact on the performance of the airplane. So there are different modes, and Dr. Robert Edwards, author of DB Cooper and Flight 305, has talked about this in a blog post where there are different types of autopilot. So it's not just an on-off switch, but there's a particular mode called nav mode, which basically allowed the airplane to navigate, because they were flying, from vortex to vortex, right? So they would fly, and they would get a radio signal, a radio fix that told them what heading to take, and then they would simply use their fingers to dial, change the dial where the plane needed to go, and the plane would fly along that heading. So if the heading was 300 degrees, they would just put 300 on the dial, and the plane would just fly autopilot on that heading until that heading was changed and they received a new radio fix. So what he said, and I'm going to read it to you, he said, you could fly Victor 23 in nav mode and it would keep you on course. Sometimes you'd take it off of the nav mode because, again, old technology, it had a tendency to quote unquote hunt for the course. It would turn far right and then come back left. It was trying to grab one radio outbound from a VOR, like one airway. At that time, pilots would typically turn off the nav mode because they could see what was happening and make the adjustment better themselves. So what I think happens there is they were flying on autopilot, realized that they were a couple miles off the center line and they needed to change course, took it off autopilot and hand flew it around the airport.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Back on Victor 23 and then put it back on autopilot. The pilot that I spoke with agreed wholeheartedly that was probably what was happening.
Yeah. Okay. So we got a bunch of people talking here. Basically, yeah. So Uncle Jim, Radicek is the only person that I know of who's ever said that they were manually flying the plane. Okay. Ammerman, who was the air traffic controller at the time, said it was autopilot. Paul Soderlund, who somebody asked who Paul Soderlund was. Paul Soderlund is in the Aviation Hall of Fame. He is one of the greatest pilots probably ever. And he was older at the time, and he was Northwest's guru, essentially. He was the director of flight operations technical. So, but he was like the kind of the god of aviation for Northwest, okay? And he was on the horn the whole time with the crew, talking them through the hijacking, okay? But Soderlund said it was on autopilot. Ammerman said autopilot. I bet if we asked Anderson, he'd probably say it was autopilot.
Yeah. Well, Anderson indicates that Captain Scott was the pilot. There's pilot flying and pilot non-flying, or pilot monitoring.
Right.
And basically, you have a pilot who's in charge of navigating the aircraft and another pilot who's in charge of monitoring the gauges and communications, etc. So you don't have one pilot taking on the whole burden. And Anderson seems to indicate that Scott was the pilot flying.
Yeah, and
never says anything about hand flying the aircraft.
Yeah. That's okay. So somebody's asking. Uncle Jim keeps talking about. He said manually, and it's on YouTube. Yeah, I know. Radicek says a lot of things.
Yeah,
that
and that's
unfortunately
several decades hence.
Decades old memories.
Right. It does not comport with what we know from the files. So
yeah, and it's been a bit of a sad realization the more you really dig into the original files, and you go, because like as someone who wrote a book on this, like I want to get it right. So like, I have to, like, if there is an incongruence somewhere in testimony, I have to decide which one to choose, because I can't just say both, right? So Bill Radicek saying something 42 years later is not the same as what they said that night on the actual radio transcripts that we have, right? When we have on my website, for those who don't know, norjak.org, norjak.org, you can read those transcripts for yourself. See what the pilots were saying the whole time. Radicek's memory, sadly, is flawed 40-something years later. There are a lot of things he says that we know aren't true. He talks about the bag being he talks about Cooper's bag being like in a satchel, but it wasn't, with handles or something. No, it was a laundry bag, essentially. It's that behind me is the exact bag, I'm quite certain, that they used. And so, yeah, no, Radicek says a lot of things. But yeah, that's who Soderlund was. Yeah. Nikki says he liked to add color commentary to the event years later. Yeah, basically what it is
war stories.
War stories. He's telling war stories. Nikki points out in
Radicek's narrative, he's talking to air traffic control. He's talking to the company. He's hand flying the aircraft. He's doing everything in his telling. That's simply not possible. That's not how in fact, the pilot that I spoke with, he said that the beauty of a 727 was the 3-pilot cockpit. And it was a good captain who distributed tasks efficiently and allowed the co-pilot to do this, and he would do that, and he would instruct the flight engineer to do that, so that it was an equal distribution of tasks. But of course, Radicek has a tendency in his retelling to make him the central character and make him the hero.
I call him the professor emeritus of Big Fish University. I mean, that's kind of, he likes to, embellish.
I mean, and that's not to denigrate his character.
Right.
You know, people do it all. I mean, you know, when I tell a story, I put, you know, you like to put a little
Sure, it's color.
embellish it. And, you know, I mean, so, you know, I think we all have a tendency to do that. That's nothing, you know, it's not I'm not calling Bill Radachek a liar by any stretch of the imagination, but, you know, after 40, 50 years, you know, after multiple retellings, the narrative changes to become, you know, where he's doing everything and Bill Scott's just, you know, taking a nap.
Yeah, I know. It's a JP viewer asks, he says, why again the delay of 40 hours before the initial search? Chris?
Well, they didn't know where he jumped.
Exactly.
They didn't know where to look.
They didn't know where to look. So that's why it took 40 hours. Now, they had an indication roughly pretty quickly that they thought it was near to Portland, I think.
Yeah. In fact, Bill Radachek in his 302, immediately after the hijacking, is documented as lamenting the fact that he did not pinpoint where that pressure bump occurred. And he, you know, he says, I forget the exact words, but he said, you know, in hindsight, I could have pinpointed exactly where he departed the aircraft, but, you know, now I don't know exactly where.
Okay, so let me bring this up. So here is the one I found where, let's see, this is Soderlund talking about the lights that they saw, that the crew saw. So let me bring this up. Okay, give me a second. Let me see. Okay, so, and I'll read it for everybody. So Soderlund says, this is him contacting the FBI a few days later. It says here, Mr. Soderlund told me, contrary to our earlier belief, that the crew told him that they could see the lights of Portland and other distinctive lights in that area. So given knowledge of the specific area, the hijacker could very easily have made a jump to a specific location, which is interesting. Okay, there's that. And this another thing too, while we're at it, this is what Radachek told the FBI 15 minutes after getting off the plane. He says, Radachek stated that they had not yet reached Portland proper, but were definitely in the suburbs or immediate vicinity thereof.
Yeah.
So,
and that's not even that's the 302 that was typed up, you know, a couple days later. The NITEL that was sent to Washington that night uses different terminology. And I don't have that to pull up, but I believe it says something like the jump occurred within Portland or in proximity to, which, you know, you know, is interesting. You have all of these different descriptions, but I think at the very least, and again, we're splitting hairs, at the very least, it indicates that the jump occurred much farther south than the FBI's original drop zone. Whether that's Orchards, whether that's Vancouver, we can go back and forth on that, but I think it definitely indicates that they were much closer to Portland than they were to the Lewis River, much closer to the Columbia River than to the Lewis. I'll put it that way.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Oh yeah, for sure. I totally agree with that. Yeah. Uncle Jim says they felt the bump on autopilot. Yes, it was felt in their ears. Their ears popped.
Yeah. And that's the distinction, is it was a physical sensation, not a movement of the aircraft. Mm-hmm. It was not as if the aircraft jostled and moved around.
Right.
It was simply the air pressure in the cabin causing a physical sensation in their ear. So that's a distinction.
Yeah,
you know,
and
that needs to be
in my video, I kind of wish I had made sure to point out, but I didn't want to disrupt the flow of the video. But in that video I did recently, did DB Cooper jump? When I talk about the pressure bump, I'm using clips from DB Cooper documentaries. And in those documentaries, the crew does this. They jostle physically, like the plane lurches in those documentaries, yeah. And that's just not real.
Not accurate.
Not at all.
It was a physical sensation, not a movement of the aircraft. Right. So, at least to the best of our knowledge, because I have not read anything that indicates that there was a physical movement of the aircraft during the pressure bump.
No, not at all. Let's see. So Bill thinks that when they slowed the plane down to 170 to get the stairs down, that they would have gotten off autopilot at that time.
Yeah, it's possible. I'm not exactly sure how the 727 if they could adjust airspeed without taking it off autopilot. Like I said, they had different modes, nav mode and heading mode. So I'd have to ask about that, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. Yeah.
And Jay's asking, like, he's dubious that they even had autopilot in 71. Absolutely.
They definitely did. I've been
Sure.
in a cockpit, seen it. So yes, they survived. It was very good autopilot, to the point that it could handle the configuration that Cooper gave them without
And again, we have FBI files from 1971 where they're discussing it.
Correct.
So
yeah.
it existed. Somebody asked me about suspects. Somebody said, let's see, he's thinking about, let me find this. Sorry, folks. It was Call of Foodie. That's funny. Nice name. Says, he says 100 suspects. He means 1,000, but says, Ryan Burns, do we believe that that of the 1,000 suspects, is one of them actually Cooper? I mean, possibly, but probably not. I mean, just the mathematics of who Cooper could be is vast, right? So maybe, though. I mean, they did a good job, though. I'll just say that they did a good job.
I think
vetting these people.
that there were, I think I did, I tried to narrow it down of white males around Cooper's age, or presumed age, between 40 and 50, in the United States, alive at that time. And I think the number was about 11 million. So you're drawing from a pool of 11 million white males of that age.
Yep.
And then, I don't know the data. Maybe you could, narrow it down further by smokers and things of that nature. But, and I have a friend, a guy I went to college with, who's a higher up in the Census Bureau. And he provided me that information and gave me that breakdown. So it was about, I think I posted it on the Facebook group. I don't know the exact number, but it was about 11 million American males who Cooper could have been.
Okay. Yeah. Robert Moore is in our chat. He's talking. He says the 727 autopilot was very basic. He said, I don't think it had AT. I don't know what that means. But he says it could well have been hand flown when slowing and configuring probably the gear.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And yes, I mean, it was primitive. It was 50 years ago. So, according to like an Airbus, or, or compared to an Airbus or a, 787. Yeah. I mean, it's
sure.
primitive, but I've talked with people who flew the 727-100, and they all said that the autopilot was very good.
Yeah, Robert, you sound knowledgeable on this stuff. If you're on Facebook, join our Facebook group. We always need more pilots and aviation people in this case, for sure. Bill Rollins mentions, and he's right. Yeah. Bill Rollins says that Radachek told him that they went to 30 degrees of flaps when they slowed the plane down. That's true. That's correct. That's in the transcripts. You can see that.
Yep.
They do that.
Well, they did. I don't know if he did.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I tell you though, what's interesting is one thing that does speak to Cooper having some sense is I have come to the conclusion, and I put it in my book, in my narrative, because you have to decide these things. You just have to. And that Cooper is the one. So again, Bill Radachek is Bill Radachek. Bill says that when Cooper calls to the cockpit and says, I can't get the stairs down, the stairs won't open up. And Bill says, so I said, well, hold on a minute. And I slowed the plane down, right? Well, according to Harold Anderson, and according to other things from 71, it was actually Cooper who said, slow the plane down. He goes, I can't get the stairs down, slow the plane down a bit. So it was Cooper himself who understood that the wind was keeping the stairs from falling, right? And so if you slow it down, you can get down further. So that speaks to him at least having some logic, I guess, to know that it was the wind keeping the stairs up.
And, that makes sense, because if I'm sitting in the cockpit and I get a call that says the stairs won't open, I'm thinking, oh, snap, we've got to send Tina back there to help him open the stairs. He doesn't know how to work the handle or something.
Right.
There's any number of reasons why the stairs wouldn't go down. For them to immediately assume that it was because of the airspeed, is a pretty big leap on their part. So it would make sense that Cooper is sitting there looking at the air stairs,
not going, yeah,
partially open, and thinking to himself, well, if they slow down, it'll allow it to go down. I mean, that's just, so it would make sense. It would make more sense to me that Cooper was relaying this information to the cockpit.
Just logically looking at it, going, okay, I can see that wind is causing this problem.
Right. Rather than the cockpit making that leap to, oh, well, let's slow it down. That's why the stairs aren't down. How do they know why the stairs aren't lowering,
Yeah. James here in our chat says, was Cooper's voice recorded on the black box voice recorder? No.
Well, yes and no.
It would have been. Yeah.
Yes and no. The cockpit voice recorder and the cockpit voice recorder did record his voice, presumably, because he would have been talking to the crew at some point, right? But the cockpit voice recorder copied over itself every 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So anything that would have been recorded on the cockpit voice recorder would have been lost 30 minutes afterwards, because
it's a real bummer. But yeah, because otherwise we would have him a few times. I think twice we would probably have him. We know that he directly talked to the crew twice.
Yeah.
Once when he called about the stairs, and then once when they called back and said, "Is everything okay?" He said, "Yeah, I'm fine."
And the cockpit voice recorder would be really critical, because we would be able to go back and listen to the conversations that the crew was having around the time of the oscillations and the pressure bump and all of those things. We would have heard those conversations that they had amongst each other and had a much better understanding of the sequence of events that we really don't have right now. So
for those in the chat, yeah, for those in the chat who aren't understanding, but they reported the oscillations immediately, but when the pressure bump happened, they waited, 5-10 minutes,
3, 4, 5 minutes. Yeah.
Before reporting it to Northwest Airlines. So if they had done it immediately, then we would have a better time, but they didn't. And it's a real bummer.
Yeah. Even Anderson laments this fact in his interview with Georgia. He says, that's where the uncertainty comes in, because we didn't, we talked about it amongst ourselves first before we reported it.
Right.
So
yeah,
because they weren't sure what was going on. They didn't know what a pressure bump meant. They kind of thought maybe, but so they kind of were like discussing it amongst themselves. Well, what do we do? What does this mean? So there's a lot of the
fact that Radicek says we think he's doing something with the stairs is indicative that they knew that something was occurring back there.
Yeah.
So the pressure bump.
He must be doing something with the air stairs. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
So it was definitely a change that was happening. That is not
a Radicek embellishment. That is in the actual transcripts.
And that's one of the few transcripts we actually have of him talking to Northwest Airlines.
Right.
That
and
little segment.
Right. And yeah, it's pretty wild. But yeah, so as far as suspects go, I don't think all of the ones that I've come across several guys in the FBI files. My God, Jay, Jay, my man, you watch my show every time. Cooper was not wearing loafers. No, we've discussed this. He was wearing ankle-high shoes of some sort, like little booties or something.
He was wearing bunny slippers with bunny ears.
Yeah, right. He wasn't wearing loafers. That comes from a 1981 AP article. There was an article. So
hey, you know what? Everybody just needs to stop and go back and watch our myths and misconceptions video and our truths and certainties video. Just go back and listen to them right now.
See, the problem is, okay, so, and I talk about this in the introduction to my book, that Cooper sources have always been limited because the FBI didn't say much. The witnesses very rarely talked. So the number of things, if you were interested in Cooper before the FBI files were released, you had a few books that were non-biased. The majority of books were suspect grift books. So you had a few books, you had a few news articles from the time period that were wrong a lot of times because it's the media and they get things wrong. And then what the biggest culprit that I found that spread misinformation was a 1981 10-year, like the 10-year retrospective article that the AP wrote. And then, the AP is going to be published in 400 newspapers, right? This AP story about Cooper is in like 400 papers. So like everybody, so this is a lot of Cooperites are reading this things that, like, basically, if you're writing a Cooper article in 1999, you're going to find this AP article from 81 and you're going to use it as part of your sourcing, right? So it's a repetition of misinformation. That a lot of it started from this AP article. And the AP article was the first one I saw, that because I did a search for like loafers Cooper on like newspapers.com. And the very first time you see that is in 81. So I don't know where they came up with that. Okay. The 81 article also mentions Cooper having 2 drinks. Cooper had 1 drink and he spilled it. He didn't even get 1 drink full. He spilled it. So that's where 2 drinks comes from. There's a couple other ones too that are some of the weird myths about Cooper. But yeah, there's mountains of misinformation on that. So yeah. So
well, I'm getting down to the nitty gritty here as far as battery.
Yeah, so I'll wrap it up soon, but I'll just say this, and so
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say dbcooperevents.com.
Yes,
guys, if please come. CooperCon. I mean, look, the Museum of Flight. I've been to a lot of aviation museums. I was in England a few weeks ago. I was at the RAF museum there. Cool, but not the Museum of Flight. I mean, I have never seen anything like that.
They have a SR-71 Blackbird in the
just
building.
Just sitting there.
It's just remarkable.
It was 747 just sitting there, like,
yeah. And
jumbo jet.
To walk on board an actual 727-100 and look around, and and that's not to disregard all of the amazing speakers and panels. The one that I'm most excited about is, I think for the very first time ever, we're going to get a paratrooper of the year, a recreational skydiver with 50 years of skydiving experience, and a smoke jumper who is also a master rigger who worked for Air America or worked for the CIA.
With a cargo kicker.
Yeah. All on the same, and all 3 of those men are going to be on the stage together. So if you enjoy the parachuting aspect of DB Cooper and want to learn more about that, it does not get any better, and it likely will never get any better than having those 3 experts on the stage at the same time, answering questions about Cooper's jump.
Yeah, that's going to be cool. Also, and I'll point out too, Colleen Fitzpatrick will be there speaking. Yes. She is one of the foremost experts on the planet Earth on DNA. Yep. DNA. She has solved dozens of cold cases, including mysteries like the Somerton Man.
Yep.
So.
Yep. And she's going to be offering her perspective on how DNA can be used to solve the Cooper case. And frankly, I think DNA is the only way this case is solved. So that's going to be super fascinating, and having her as an expert there is going to be great.
And Tom Kay is going to be giving his discussions about the new tie particle evidence. They rescanned one of the sticky stubs from the tie with like basically, and they told Tom, they said, look, when we did this scanning for you back in 2018, 2017, what it is now is night and day. So, and they rescanned, so tie particle stuff.
And apparently Stone is very excited about what they have found. And it's going to be some really interesting revelations that Tom has in store for us. So you definitely don't want to miss that. And then also the social aspect of CooperCon. I mean, we get to hang out and have beers and, hang
out with us.
And hang out with, Bill Mitchell and, who was the passenger sat closest to, I mean, it's the whole event, is a weekend long. Is not to be missed. If you have
also, and I think that our happy hour for the Friday happy hour, I'm pretty sure, I won't say who the sponsor is, but a Cooperite will be paying for everybody's first 2 drinks at the happy hour we're going to. So,
and that's terrific. And in addition to that, the happy hour itself, from 5 to 8, is $5 drafts, $5 cocktails, and $5 glasses of wine, and then $5 off every appetizer.
And that's after your first 2 drinks are free on Friday. So,
and that's after the first 2 drinks. That's a great place to get drunk, and then head over across the street and grab a bite to eat at Sharp's Roasters.
amazing place to eat.
So
Great food.
And everybody walks away from CooperCon saying the event is terrific, but the social part and hanging out, the hours and the dinners, and just getting to know everybody and making friends with people, that's where it's at. And we've tried to make that as awesome as possible for everybody. So you don't want to miss it. Even if you're a casual Cooperite and you're just kind of getting your feet wet in the case, you want to come. You want to come to CooperCon in Seattle, November 15th to the 17th. Tickets are available at dbcooperevents.com. Get them while they're hot, man.
Yeah, it's going to be cool. And just obviously, one last thing, we're going to have Drew Beeson will be there, the author of Paratrooper of Fortune. He'll be talking about Ted Braden.
Mm-hmm.
And John Limbach, author of Where Was Skip. He'll be there with a lot of new stuff about Skip Hall. A lot of cool stuff he's found out about Skip Hall. He'll be giving a lecture on that.
Yeah, and then Pat Rinaldi will be there. Pat Boland will be there with Lee Gossett, who we mentioned before. As far as the parachuting, he's also going to be available talking about his time in Air America. And I think Pat's done a lot of research into the Air America angle. So interested to see what she has to say. So
yep. All right, guys. Well, y'all take care, and I'll talk to y'all again soon in a couple weeks. Okay.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye, guys.